What if everything you think you know about China's economic rise is wrong? What if the world's most dramatic economic transformation wasn't built on a master plan, but on a series of shocking failures, unintended consequences, and high-stakes corrections that pushed China from famine-level poverty to near superpower status? And here's the real mystery. What if the very strategy that lifted China up is now threatening to hold it back? To understand China's economy in 2025, you have to unravel the long chain of decisions, some brilliant, some disastrous, that reshaped a nation and still drive global markets today. China's story begins in 1949 with a country in ruins. After decades of civil war and invasion, China was economically shattered. Inflation was rampant, industry was primitive, and the financial system was barely functional. The new communist government believed only a purely centralized command economy could rebuild the nation. So banks were turned into instruments of state planning, not profit. Private enterprise was erased. Prices were controlled. Production was dictated, and every major resource, land, labor, capital, became the property of the state. For a brief moment, this brought order and stability, but the early command economy quickly revealed its flaws. Without market signals, the state made decisions blindly, often guided more by ideology than reality. This weakness exploded during the Great Leap Forward, when Mao Zedong attempted to force industrialization overnight. Backyard steel furnaces replaced rational planning, farming was reorganized into massive communes, and unrealistic quotas drove production figures far beyond actual capacity. The result was a catastrophic famine, economic collapse, and one of the darkest periods in modern Chinese history. China learned a brutal lesson: a centrally planned economy can mobilize people, but it cannot accurately measure or manage real productivity. When Mao died in 1976, China stood at a crossroads. Enter Deng Xiaoping, a leader who understood that survival required change. But Deng didn't announce a revolution. Instead, he did something far more strategic. He reintroduced markets quietly, experimentally, and without abandoning the political system. Farmers were allowed to keep and sell surplus crops. Productivity surged. Special economic zones opened China's doors to foreign investment. Coastal provinces blossomed into manufacturing hubs. And for the first time in modern history, China reconnected with global trade. By the 1990s, China's economic landscape had transformed. State-owned enterprises were restructured, private firms emerged, and the financial sector evolved from a rigid state allocator into a complex but still state-directed banking ecosystem. The phrase "socialism with Chinese characteristics" became the ideological umbrella under which markets could operate without challenging political authority. When China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, the transformation accelerated. Factories boomed, exports surged, and hundreds of millions of citizens moved out of poverty. China became the workshop of the world, the engine of global supply chains, and an economic miracle. But every miracle has a breaking point. The 2008 global financial crisis exposed a weakness in China's export-driven model. When Western demand collapsed, China turned inward, launching an enormous stimulus program. Local governments borrowed aggressively. Construction exploded. Infrastructure projects multiplied. But this strategy, effective in the short term, created massive imbalances. Easy credit inflated real estate markets. Developers accumulated huge debt. Ghost cities emerged. And China became increasingly dependent on investment rather than productivity. The growth was real, but the risks were growing faster. By the mid-2010s, the cracks could no longer be ignored. China faced slowing population growth, rising labor costs, and diminishing returns on investment. The property market, once the backbone of household wealth, began showing signs of strain. Companies like Evergrande teetered under enormous liabilities. Local governments, reliant on land sales to fund services, struggled as property demand weakened. In response, Beijing tightened control over key industries, from technology and finance to education and entertainment. The aim was stability and long-term restructuring. But the shift created uncertainty and reduced the entrepreneurial energy that had powered earlier decades. Economic growth slowed to levels unseen since the 1970s. China was no longer racing ahead, it was recalibrating. The fallout of these decisions is still unfolding in 2025. The financial system remains heavily influenced by the state, but it must now support a slowing, aging, and debt-heavy economy. Demographic decline threatens the workforce. The once reliable property sector is fragile, and the balance between control and innovation grows more delicate each year. China is caught in a paradox. Market forces drove its rise, but tighter political oversight shapes its future. Every policy choice now carries greater consequences. Strangely, this moment echoes China's own past. The rigid planning of the 1950s created collapse. The controlled experimentation of the 1980s sparked growth. The debt-fueled expansion of the 2000s built prosperity but inflated bubbles. And the tightening of the 2020s is an attempt to correct excesses again. China's economic history moves in cycles of control, release, expansion, and correction. And today, the cycle is repeating. 3 lessons stand out from this journey. First, China's economic success was never inevitable. It was built through constant adaptation, not fixed ideology. Second, the hybrid system that once empowered rapid growth now faces structural constraints that require deeper reforms. Third, China's future depends on a critical choice, whether to embrace more market flexibility or reinforce state oversight in pursuit of stability. What happens next won't just shape China, it will reshape the world. If you want more deep, story-driven explanations of global economics and history, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and stay tuned for the next episode.